Strategic Petroleum Reserve. You can see this there on C-SPAN. This top level is 750 million barrels. And you see up here in 2020, this just sharp drop-off, that drops down to 350 million barrels. That is the defense being exercised by a president trying to save his party. That is not being used specifically for the national security interest of the United States, and that is absolutely horrific. Dumping the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, dumping it in order to drive gas prices down. Well, you know what? Those chickens are going to come home to roost.
They absolutely are. And like I said, if you're worried about the climate, if you're worried about fossil fuel use, the most important thing to do, the most responsible thing to do is to do it efficiently. America does it more cleanly and more efficiently than everybody else, and we have pipelines, but we can't use them. Like I said, one trip, one way, from one tanker, 50 a day come into the United States, 1 million gallons burned one way for each tanker. So that's 50 million a day. Everybody's worried about their cars. Nobody gives a hoot about this, and none of it's necessary. Absolutely zero of it is necessary. Before I turn it over to the good gentleman from Louisiana, I'll just remind you, in this CR, in this continuing resolution that we're going to vote on in this House tomorrow, I think, even though we say we want to save our country and our citizens, our bosses from this tyranny, people are going to vote for it anyhow. $2 billion for unaccompanied minors flooding the border while doing nothing to solve the border crisis, because as the good gentleman from Texas said, how much did we spend from the Department of Homeland Security to secure our border annually?
Close to $60 billion.
Close to 60, but yet we need another 2 for unaccompanied minors that are coming. We don't need the extra 2. You just stop the unaccompanied minors, right, and you don't need the extra 2. With that, I'll turn it over to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins.
I thank my colleague. I would like to bring our focus onto our total national debt for a moment. We're discussing, as concerned American patriots, as conservative, constitutionalist men that love our country, we're discussing this continuing resolution of temporary funding of the federal government that we stand against because of the process and the lack of appropriate regular order that reflects the failure of this body to perform regarding our budget responsibilities that were laid out clearly by our founders. So let's talk about our debt, $31 trillion in debt. It was 1980 in America before we had accumulated $1 trillion in debt. So in the first 200 years of our existence, America accumulated $1 trillion in debt. In the following 40 years, we've accumulated 30. So we have $31 trillion in debt. If this body were to balance the budget and run a $1 billion surplus, it would require 31,000 years to address a $31 trillion debt. Because, my friends and colleagues, Mr. Speaker, my colleague, a trillion is 1,000 billion. No one here, nor across the nation that we love and serve, believes we have 31,000 years to fix this thing. We must restore fiscal sanity to this body, and I yield to the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman. Can I inquire as to the time remaining, Mr. Speaker?
The gentleman has 4 minutes remaining.
4 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield to the gentleman from Texas.
I would only add, I mentioned before, but I just think it merits repeating, that we are at roughly $31 trillion in debt, as the gentleman said. If you set out to count to 31 trillion at one Mississippi, it would take you 1 million years to count to that. Just to put in perspective what that is. When I began running for office in December 2017, our debt was $21 trillion. $10 trillion in 5 years since I began running for office. Yeah,
it's my understanding. I think that the last year and 3/4 of the Biden administration has racked up more debt than the entire 8 years of the Obama administration. And we found that unacceptable. But yet here we are, and yet in this body, on this week, at this time, we're going to vote to just continue like nothing's happening, like that's not happening, like we don't care. We're going to go home and say, if you elect us, all this stuff's going to end. Yet when you have an opportunity to stop it, when we have an opportunity in this body, all the things that the gentleman from Texas outlined, the things that I outlined, the Ukraine funding, the $3 billion for Operation Allies Welcome, the COVID funding. Oh, by the way, the administration, the President of the United States said the pandemic is over, but we're going to add more COVID funding in here, right? Can't do without that crisis. All that included, but hardly a whimper out of this town, because it's more important that this town keeps going than the American people get what they asked for, what they elected us for. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, this is completely unacceptable. If we're not going to fight now, like I would agree with my colleague from Texas, if Republicans aren't going to fight now, understand, not one of us is a Democrat. We don't have any authority or majority in this House of Representatives. There's no majority by Republicans in the Senate. That's the complete legislature. There's no majority of Republicans in the executive branch. That's President Biden. Those are Democrats. How, for the love of the Lord, can Republicans be blamed for voting no on this tyranny? If Democrats want to continue tyranny, God bless them. They can go explain that to their constituents, their bosses. But why would Republicans help them? And more importantly, why would Republicans help them when reinforcements are coming right over the horizon? We got an election in 40 days. And as Mr. Higgins said, to pass a continuing resolution, to pass a bill that continues this tyranny into December, after there's no accountability. People have lost their elections. There's no accountability to offer them yet another opportunity to continue the tyranny.
It's dangerous.
How do you explain that to your constituents? How do you explain, well, I voted for that because it was important that Washington, D.C. and all these programs needed your money, needed the money that you wake up every day and go to work for. They needed it, and you didn't. Mr. Roy, people in my district pack their lunch at night. They get up early while it's still dark. They kiss their little children that are in their beds asleep while it's still dark, and they leave for work. And they count on us here to make sure that we're faithfully spending adequately, appropriately, responsibly their hard-earned dollars. Mr. Higgins, you talked about this the other day in conference. Your paycheck. Your paycheck. People work hard for it, and they depend on us. And what do we do with it? Mr. Roy, give us another example. You got like 1,000 of them there. How do we blow it?
Well, I think we got about 20 seconds left.
Go ahead.
So all I would say is, if we want to do this, if we want an economy that's strong, stop spending money we don't have. Stop spending money to fund a bureaucracy that's going after the American people. If you want a nation that's safe, stop talking down your cops. Stand with your cops. If you want a military that's strong, stop being woke. End the woke destruction of our military. If you want a border that's secure, secure it. Turn people away, accept the people that need help, but turn people away and actually detain them, and stop the control of our borders by cartels that are endangering the American people.